Hey guys, this is Steve Baker, the Pragmatic Libertarian. I'm really excited to bring you these next couple of podcasts. I have a special guest with me who I'll be introducing here shortly. His name is C. Edmund Wright. He's a writer, has published a couple of books, has had hundreds of articles published by American Thinker, Breitbart, and many other publications as well. In addition to that, he has been a writer for, I guess the scoop is, and I'm excited to be the one to bring you this scoop, is that for several years, he was the ghostwriter and a show prep writer for the Rush Limbaugh show. And the scoop in that is that, Rush has this whole concept of being the guy with half his brain tied behind his back, while not revealing that he has had help and that he's had some support, and he's had some writers behind the scenes working for him as well. And Edmund has never before revealed and discussed this publicly, and for the first time ever, we're bringing you that scoop here on an episode of the Pragmatic Libertarians podcast, and I'm excited to do so. So part one is dealing with mostly Edmund's writing for Rush, American Thinker, Breitbart, Milo Yiannopoulos, and some other things as well. So we cover a lot of his background and history, his development as a writer, even though at the same time he was a very successful businessman, is a very successful businessman here out of North Carolina and throughout the whole mid-Atlantic region. And then part two, we discuss more specifically the current events and the COVID-19 commie virus 2020, as it were, crisis that we're all dealing with at the moment. So part one is about to start here in just a second. And I'm really excited about it, as I said, and I hope that you'll hang in, view it. I don't know how long it is, haven't looked yet, but I think you'll learn a lot about C. Edmund Wright and get a unique perspective from him and his own views on what's going on in the world. And then part two I think is really, really great. He has just a fantastic perspective and analysis on what we're going through right now. So anyway, part one begins right now, and here we go. Hey, this is Steve Baker, the Pragmatic Libertarian, and as I mentioned, I have with me today Mr. C. Edmund Wright, writer extraordinary. Not the writer, but tell me, Edmund, what are you guys up to today, considering it's Easter Sunday and we're all sequestered at home? Well, how are you and the family doing?
Doing good. My wife and I watched Easter service by live stream, and then we took a walk, maintained social distancing on the Greenway.
Yeah.
It does seem like in the last week that people are getting less paranoid about that. People are getting more comfortable, more back to normal as far as out walking around in Drury Hills and the Greenway area near North Hills.
Yeah, I did a walk last Saturday. I walked about 6 miles up and down through downtown Raleigh, and there were hundreds of people out. It was a perfect day. It was 75 degrees, sunny, and they were walking their dogs. They were, family groups were out pushing their baby carriages, and
Yep.
The parks were, they weren't crowded. They certainly weren't crowded in groups, but people were out everywhere. And in fact, because I do a lot of walking, it was an extraordinarily large amount of people out on the sidewalks and in the park areas.
You can't go to Umstead Park, probably can't go to Lake Wheeler or whatever. So
no, the state parks are closed.
Yeah, liquor stores open.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure we've both done our fair share contributing to the state coffers in the last couple of weeks. In fact,
Maybe so.
in fact, we should probably, in full disclosure, you and I have been friends for over 20 years, and you
Yep.
credit me with two extraordinary ongoing expenses in your life, which are
Yes, sushi and single malt scotch.
that's it, cost you a lot of money.
That's right. You never got me on the cigars, but you got me on the other
Uh,
two.
That's right. That's right. Well, let's go ahead and dive into this thing. As you've been a very successful businessman in the Mid Atlantic region for years and years and years. Um, but before we get into who you have been writing for, and I'll talk a little bit later about the two books that you've published. But what is the genesis of your writing career? Where did it all begin?
I was like 13 or 14, and I was a high school correspondent for the Raleigh Times, and first started covering high school football. And my parents would take me to the game, which would be sometimes 30, 40 minutes away, pick me up. I'd come home on an old Underwood typewriter and write up the story, old school, and then they would take me down to the News and Observer Raleigh Times headquarters downtown Raleigh, maybe midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, turn in my hard copy, and it would be on the doorstep the next day for the high school football coverage. Old school newspaper.
Did you get paid for that?
I did.
Really?
Probably not enough to cover my parents' gas, but I got paid. Yeah,
13?
Four, 14 for sure.
Yeah. First paycheck as a writer.
Yeah, yeah,
It's pretty awesome.
yeah.
Where did it go from there?
I was interested in sports journalism all the way through college, University of South Carolina. Did small market radio. I got out of college in the Jimmy Carter recession, right in the beginning of the Reagan turnaround, but the Reagan turnaround had not happened. And so I was like making no money working for a small town radio station. Got into play-by-play football, basketball. Then wanted to make more money. Got into advertising sales, advertising agency work, and he was actually working with a bunch of ultra liberals in a kind of bohemian ad agency downtown Columbia that are really moved away from what I call the toy department and got more interested in politics. And that was about the time Carol Campbell first won election as governor of South Carolina. It was during the it was during the Reagan years. So that's when I sort of moved away from sports and into politics back in the 80s. Although I really didn't get involved in any meaningful way till years after that, because I was involved in the radio and ad agency business for a while, and then some other totally unrelated businesses later, as you know.
But then you moved into directly campaign support. Weren't you involved in the '92 Bush election here in North Carolina?
I was. I just started another business, just moved back not too long before that to the Raleigh area from South Carolina, and didn't really care that much for George H.W. Bush or Dan Quayle, but I cared that we keep this couple from Arkansas, and I viewed them as a couple all the way back to 1992. We kept the Clinton couple out of the White House. So I walked into North Carolina Bush Quayle headquarters in summer of 92 and said, I'm here to volunteer. I'm not real good at stuffing envelopes. I don't have a Rolodex of rich friends you can call, but pretty good at explaining why we're right and they're wrong. And of course, they were very patronizing, but they don't turn away any volunteers. But within 2 weeks, they figured out I was pretty good at that, and I was communications director for North Carolina Bush Quayle in '92.
Wow, and there was a measure of success there compared to the rest of the country, and that was that
Yeah,
North Carolina carried, right, for Bush. Isn't that correct?
North Carolina carried for Bush by like razor thin margin. North Carolina was one of 20 states that James Carville and George Stephanopoulos said it was Bill Clinton's 20-state strategy. They won 19 of those. They lost North Carolina, but of course they won a bunch more. So it wasn't even a very close election. And Ross Perot muddied the water, and that was frustrating too.
Now, when did you actually start becoming published as a political writer commentator?
The first thing that was really published was a column in the News and Observer, two columns actually, in the first couple of weeks following 9/11 in September 2001. And News and Observer ran almost no conservative commentaries whatsoever. But they ran a couple of mine, just submitted them. Didn't get paid for that from the News and Observer, but they did run them, and that plus the campaign experience in '92 told me that I'm good at this. I love this, and I'm good at it. So
Well, I want to get to the good stuff as quickly as we
yeah.
can. So I'm gonna make a quick leap. If you need to go back in and fill in some blanks on how we got there, but as I did in the introduction before you and I went live here, I had mentioned to our followers that you were writing show prep for Rush Limbaugh for a couple of years, 2.5 years, something of that nature. Tell
Oh
me
wow,
how in
you're
the
gonna go
world.
there,
Oh
huh?
yeah, we're going to go there, and
We're gonna go there. Okay.
we're going to go there for a couple of reasons. Because there was a time not too many years ago, I remember having hours long conversations with you about when you would go there. And you were very hesitant to go there for quite a long time and talk about that, because I mean that particular relationship was somewhat on the down low. In fact, it was 100% on the down
Totally, totally. Yeah.
low. And
On the down low with one level in between, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's just go there and tell me how that, as briefly as you can, how the relationship started. But then we're going to get into and talk a little bit about the actual show prep itself and how that worked.
Yeah. In March of 2008, I was just starting to write for American Thinker. And my first column was published, and it was it was about this was during the big Jeremiah Wright, Barack Obama days to set the stage. And I had what I called the black street cred for Jeremiah Wright and Barack Obama, and why Obama's membership in that church mattered is because he went to Jeremiah Wright's church specifically to get his black street cred, which you can get in a black separatist theology church. Because prior to Jeremiah Wright's church, he was Yale. I mean, he was Harvard and Kansas and Hawaii. Not exactly, street, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I wrote the Black Street Cred Theory article, and Rush featured it in his opening monologue that day. I had no idea how that happened. I just was driving and heard it on the radio, talking about C. Edmund Wright's Black Street Cred Theory. And then one thing led to another. He started featuring a lot of my articles on his show, as he was using a lot of American Thinker stuff back in 2008. Then one thing led to another, and through this 6 degrees of separation, I found out that Rush's show prep actually went through Raleigh, went through one particular person who happened to live like 4 miles from me. So small world, and friends of friends put us together, and one thing led to another, and I was just submitting stuff to her, and the next thing I knew, I was kind of ghostwriting by accident.
It was kind of interesting because back in those days, you and I were, of course, emailing, talking a lot, and used to send me these color coded transcripts before the Rush Limbaugh show even went live at noon here on the East Coast, and these transcripts were very specifically written. It was obviously a format that I assume you had to follow, and then I'd turn the Limbaugh show on, and many times right at the top of his show during the opening monologue, I would then hear him recite almost verbatim what you had sent me 15 or 30 minutes before the show ever went live. What was the process there?
Well, the person in Raleigh, and I don't want to list her name. She and I are kind of on the outs now, anyway. She had sort of morphed into this process, I guess, with Rush over the years. She showed me how it worked. So I just sent her stuff that worked the way she worked it. And, roughly it would be red would be important stuff, and blue would be suggested ghostwriting, suggested ideas. And you're right. Sometimes he would use them almost verbatim, but of course, if you didn't know better, you'd think he was just spouting Rush off top of his head.
Right.
And I had just heard him since the second day he was on the air nationally, which is I picked him up in a radio station in South Carolina, and I just instantly, it's like he and I thought the same way. We would reach the same conclusion 99.9% of the time. We just reached the same conclusion. Had a little bit of the same sarcastic sense of humor. So I could write in his voice, and I would hear him say it when I wrote it. And then if he used that segment, it would sound exactly like I heard it in my ear when I was writing it. And it was the easiest thing I've ever done. And it was fun and it was important. I got no recognition and no money, but it was a dadgum blast.
Now, you had a moment that you're justifiably proud of, and let's just go to that. And we'll just call it the Tea Party moment. Tell me about that moment and your history with writing for Rush.
Well, I was trying to move Rush's show prep coordinator, who was a longtime friend of Rush's from Cape Girardeau, who happened to live in Raleigh. Rush used to mention her on the air as his North Carolina mistress. Now, that's not what she was, but he did mention her from time to time under that name.
I remember that.
Yep, yep.
I always wondered who that was when he would refer to his North Carolina mistress, and I never had a clue that you had the relationship with her as well.
Yeah,
she got around,
but she's happily married to a guy Rush introduced her to, so that's why the little inside joke there. Anyway, I was trying to move them off of Morning Joe and MSNBC over to CNBC. At the time, in the early days of Obama, CNBC was mostly conservative. It was mostly watched by Merrill Lynch stockbrokers, and that's about it. But I watched it, and like a lot of people, I had become very fond of the rants of a guy named Rick Santelli, who they would go to on the floor of the Chicago Mercantile, and Rick is he was more libertarian than conservative, but he kind of in that range, and very passionate guy, very successful trader. So I'm in Charlotte and at a convention related to my other business, and I see Rick Santelli come on the air one morning in February of 2009, and he goes off on this epic rant, which he closes by saying he's going to hold a Chicago Tea Party on Lake Michigan, and he was basically talking about the Obama government and the mortgages, paying the mortgages of the deadbeats at the time, and that was his main thrust. But it was all about limited government and Tea Party representation. And I just thought, man, they better post this video quick so I can prep it, send it to my contact, and which I did. And then I was tied up in the convention all day, and at 5 o'clock, I found out that Rush had talked about Santelli all 3 hours, and he had sent it to his good friend Matt Drudge, and Drudge had featured Rick Santelli for the first time ever with the siren and the red headlines, CNBC floor trader plans revolt, and Rush named his show that day something like the Pulse of the Revolution has begun, and it was based on that. So I introduced Rush and Drudge to Rick Santelli. They introduced Rick Santelli to the nation, and Santelli introduced the term Tea Party to the nation again. And pretty soon we had the town halls and then the Tea Party groups, and the rest is history.
We, over the years, have shared a lot of those moments back and forth. But also, I've read, oh my gosh, I don't even know how many columns you've written for, pieces you've written for American Thinker, Breitbart, and other publications. But you also, through all of this process, eventually came to be recruited, I guess, to work and write for some of the campaigns, even campaign biography, for instance, for Herman Cain. How did that happen? That was the 2012 election, wasn't it?
Yeah, this would be in 2011, because they started doing some of these unofficial debates in the summer of 2011, and Herman Cain, a few people were in there. Well, a lot of people were in there, and I wrote a column for American Thinker called something like "Top 10 Reasons to Support Herman Cain for President," and it wasn't that I really ultimately expected to support him for president. I just thought having a businessman run was a really good idea. Having a normal guy run was a really good idea. Having someone who owned restaurants. I mean, if there's anything that gets in touch with all areas of America, it's restaurants and entertainment like you're in. So I just wrote that column. Neil Bortz featured it on his show, apparently. Neil and Herman are friends, both from Atlanta. And I'm sitting in my office, doing my real job, my day job, and get this call on my cell phone from Herman Cain. He had tracked me down through Bortz, through American Thinker, through my editor at American Thinker, and one thing led to another, and ended up hiring me to do some writing for him, which he used actually very little of it, but I still email him off and on. He's a delightful guy. Obviously, his campaign ended in controversy. But
well, do you remember the very specific warning I gave you about going to work for Herman Cain the day you told me about it?
No, I don't. It must have turned out to be prophetic.
Well, it was in a way. I specifically said that when you go down to meet him, be sure that you close the door behind yourself and you ask him if he has any illegitimate relationships outside of wedlock in his history. You remember that?
Yeah, I do remember that now. And of course, like I said, that that ended up being a thing. Yeah.
Well, and I didn't suggest that because that's what black guys do. I suggested it because that's what that's what the MSM is going to do, and his opponents are going to do because he's a successful black guy, and they're going to come after him. And if they can get him, that's where they're going to get him.
Especially a black conservative, yeah.
That's right. Successful black self-made multimillionaire. That's where they were going to come after him, and that's what they did. Unfortunately. Now, were you still involved with Rush at this time, or had that already ended?
That had ended a few months earlier. All
right. Well, even though the relationship with Rush was always on the down low, you and I had conversations about the desire to expand your reach, your writing career, and whether or not you could or should even use that connection. Because I mean, hey, if you were involved with Rush, that's one hell of a thing to have on your resume as a writer. And there was a lot.
Yeah, because at the time, Beck had sort of had his quick rise and then fall a little bit. Not that he ever went totally away, but he sort of flashed in the pan with his Fox show, really, really hot and heavy. And then later on, Hannity would ride the Trump train to become very prominent. But it was a long time where Rush was clearly center court of conservative thought in America, and that was during this time.
Yeah. So what brought that relationship to the end? I mean, it was a rather abrupt halt. How did that happen?
After doing it for over 2 years, and doing it not only on the down low, but one person separated and no money, no recognition. And I had worked hard. I had a blast. I had many moments of impacting the national discussion in a significant way. Not only the Tea Party moment, there were others. Making a difference, and all that was important. But at the end of the day, at some point, I had my own career I needed to try and launch, and financial concerns. I mean, would have been nothing for him to realize what I was doing to help the North Carolina mistress, throw me on the payroll for what would to him be insignificant dollars, and would have been a great part-time gig, and I would have continued to play an important role. So I had to make a move to go direct, and I knew it was a risky move, and it ended up backfiring, which I knew was a 50-50 chance. But I wasn't going to do what I was doing for no money, no recognition, nothing forever. I mean, I couldn't.
Yeah. But you did. You made an effort to contact him directly and go around the North Carolina mistress, didn't you?
Yeah. And that was because I thought she thought she was going to lose her job at that time. She was very, very, she and Rush had a personal, unrelated business squabble that she thought was going to end her relationship with him. It ended up not doing it. But me trying to go around her ended my relationship with her. So.
And you never did successfully make contact with Rush?
I successfully made contact with his attorney several times.
Yeah.
The
And did
Shapiro,
the attorney make contact with you?
the Shapiro firm in Miami. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But you personally never got there was just never any direct feedback from him?
No, he pretended it didn't happen at first, and then when I just brought some things to bear that clearly made that ridiculous, it was just like, well, okay, yeah, it happened, but we don't need to continue it. Which that actually didn't bother me. What bothered me was the first attempt to patronize me. So that
Yeah.
irritated.
What was the timeline before you ever felt good about going public with that? Because you did start eventually talking about it.
Yeah, but not really. I guess probably today more publicly than ever, depending on how many people watch it. I got to where I didn't worry about hiding it. I mean, there was you and all my family, and you and 4 or 5 other guys I know knew that it was going on while it was going on.
Yeah. Well,
There were a couple others who I would send the show preps to ahead of time when I felt like, oh, he's definitely going to use this one. And I know it used to be that you would give me a call sometimes and say, I just heard Rush do this such and such segment. Tell me you wrote that one.
I did. I did. So, and not only did you sometimes send me the show prep in advance, and I knew that it was you, but sometimes I would hear your voice in the show prep or in his delivery, and I go, "Tell me you wrote that," and often that was the case.
It was almost always the case. Yeah.
Yeah. How about that? Well, and I don't want to beat this dead horse anymore, but I encouraged you back in those days when this was coming to an end or had come to an end to go public and to use that, essentially without permission. I understand that Rush probably, since he always had this, one hand tied behind his back, talent from God thing,
Yeah.
that he probably didn't want people to know that he was in fact being fed some show prep, and that would be a little bit, that would ruin a little bit of his shtick if people knew that. So I could understand why he did not want to allow somebody to put that on their resume and use that as a calling card to advance their own career. But I was encouraging at the time that, hey, if he's not going to acknowledge it, just go ahead and tell the story. But you never really did.
No, I never did because I didn't. Number one, a lot of people are not going to believe it. I mean, it happened. Obviously, if you want to come look at my Mac and my email trail and time, date stamps and all that, I can prove it. But what's the gain there? If I had actually seen where it might have advanced my career, I probably would have used it. It just always seemed like we were going into another critical election, and we needed Rush's voice out there being impactful, not being controversial. So, I mean, or not being controversial for
Yeah.
because as much as he treated me poorly, and as much as he absolutely loved some work I sent him because the way he used it, I mean, you can hear it in his voice, but I never wanted him to stop doing what he was doing or being effective, and clearly he has been forever.
Sure. What now? Let's jump forward again. You ended up with a relationship with Breitbart. No, was that before Breitbart died or after?
It was after he died. Actually, he and I almost co-hosted an event down in Daytona Beach. He was obviously the headliner. He had to pull out at the last moment. It was a Tea Party, Florida Tea Party convention in Daytona, I guess late 2011. So I actually never knew him. Unfortunately, would have loved to, but I did end up, and I forget how this happened. I ended up writing a few little things for Breitbart Sports when it first started. Of course, that hardly got any clicks.
I remember
But
that.
then I did through that get to meet Marlowe and Bannon and Boyle and a bunch of them. Bannon calls everybody by their last name, but that one thing led to another. Bannon read a book of mine, and then he basically recruited me as a Breitbart columnist. Gave me a piece on what he called Rove Stupid, in which I ended up lengthening the name of the series to Rove Stupid, the new definition of the Republican establishment. And I had free reign on that. It was like a 19 column series. So I had total editorial control over that. And loved writing for Breitbart. But when they shifted hardcore to Trump, and not so much Breitbart per se, but when the Breitbart readership shifted hardcore for Trump, and I was a reluctant supporter of Trump, it just became clear to me that their readers no longer wanted to hear any conservative questioning of Trump. And while I was never a never Trumper, I got labeled as such because I wasn't quite on the Trump train enough to please the Breitbart people at the time. So I sort of faded away from that.
No, I remember that, again, you have always been more conservative than I am libertarian, almost. Or maybe I said that wrong. You're more conservative, but you've got a libertarian streak to be sure. I think it's coming out recently in this new pandemic. We'll talk more about that later. But
Yeah.
but I've always been on the more libertarian side than yourself. And I recall that during those early days of that campaign, that you were struggling, and rightfully so, with what was going on with Trump. And I do remember the conflict you had. Well, no, that was that conflict directly with Bannon because he was now on Trump's staff.
No, it was not with me. In fact, it wasn't even really a conflict with anybody at Breitbart. It was just I would write. I wrote some stuff that was pro-Trump. I mean, we were talking about making fun of the Republican establishment. So I wrote stuff that was pro-Trump, pro-Cruz, pro-Rand Paul, because all of those were the non-establishment, candidates. But I would question Trump on trade. I would question him on some other things. But it was amazing. You saw the power of the Trump cult, and I say that as different than conservatives or patriots who support Trump because he was better than Hillary or because he was not of Washington. But you saw the power of the cult, and with the cult, you were either all in or you must be an Obama voter in secret or something.
Right.
I got tired of that. I never had a problem with Bannon or Boyle or any of them directly.
Another leap forward. You eventually became you went to work and were writing for Milo Yiannopoulos. How in the hell did that happen? I would never see Edmund Wright hooking up, and by hooking up, I mean on a professional
Thank
level.
you for clarifying.
With Milo.
Yeah. You just make some connections, and you know how it is because you do the same thing in music. You make some connections, and suddenly somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody gets recommended to call you and want to know if you're interested in a project. And I was not doing any writing at the time, and I thought, Milo's hilarious. He's very talented. Sure. So there was another writer, and I really enjoyed working with him. He has ties to Breitbart and didn't really want not anyone that I knew at Breitbart, actually. It was just he does have ties to Breitbart, more of a coincidental thing. But that's how he knew Milo. He got my name through an agent, and we clicked automatically, and we put together Milo show for about 4 months before it went defunct. And I don't know anything about the new iteration of the Milo show. They blew through a whole lot of money before they were able to establish some podcasts as revenue producing.
Yeah. Now, did this relationship with Milo happen before his fall from grace, or was that after?
It was after his first fall from grace, I guess before his second fall from grace.
Okay.
Yeah.
What was the second one? I just remember one.
That he kind of went bankrupt.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Right. And of course, he claims that was just his company that went bankrupt, but that he was.
And that might have been true. I mean, my relationship was with a company that was set up to do that. So.
I got you. And
he's wickedly funny though. It was fun. It was really fun to write for him.
I always considered him not just he was a unique voice, obviously being flamboyantly gay and completely disinterested in what anybody else thought about him because he just didn't care, and yet conservatives and libertarians alike embraced him, en masse. So I thought he was treated very unfairly because he was abandoned by everybody all at once. He got abandoned by the left. He got abandoned by the right. I mean, he got especially hard kicked to the curb by the politically correct crowd by virtue of his unwillingness to say that the relationship that he had with the Catholic priest when he was 14 years old was not consensual, because he was adamant that it was, and that he didn't consider it a bad thing at the time. Do you think he has any chance of making a comeback?
Yeah, because he's very intelligent. He's very photogenic, telegenic, got a great accent, and very funny. Yeah, he's always a chance. Always a chance. The talent's there.
Yeah. Let's just one more time here before we switch gears, because I want to do a part two with you here where we talk about the COVID-19 coronavirus, or as I've hashtagged it, the commie virus 2020. I do want to do a whole segment with you on that, but let's circle back one more time to Rush. And despite our mutual admiration for him and his talent and success, and how he literally changed talk radio and much of conservative commentary, we both, when I say we, you and I, were rather disenchanted with Rush when he became an unflinching apologist for all things Trump. I mean, literally, Trump could do no wrong. I felt for the first time, and look, I hate putting these disclaimers out there but I have to, because of I speak largely to a more libertarian leaning audience, and a significant percentage of those just hate Trump. I mean, I hate Rush just because he's Rush, and because Rush is a proud conservative, and even though they probably agree on 90% of all
Yeah.
issues, but that's a whole other topic for a whole other time. But when Rush did make that turn, and it was clear that he was all in, you and I were both really troubled by that, because there were on that ticket in 2016 candidates much more closely aligned ideologically and with a much more consistent 95 to 99% alignment with Rush's own philosophy, like, for instance, a Ted Cruz. And Rush went all in for Trump, and from that point forward, man, I tell you, for the first time in his career, he was unlistenable.
Yeah, he was. He really did. It was stunning. And of course, this was 4 or 5 years after I'd had anything to do with the show, so it's totally not related to that. Ted Cruz was the candidate Rush has been describing for 25 years as the one he wanted, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
absolutely, he had the man right there.
Yeah, and certainly everybody on that stage was more philosophically aligned with Rush, with the exception of John Kasich. Everybody was more aligned with Rush than Trump would be from an ideological standpoint. But as you and I noticed, Trump has a charisma and a hold on people. And much like with Obama, people read into Obama things that weren't there. A lot of conservatives read into Trump things that weren't there. Rush, one of them. And it was stunning to watch. I happen to know that there's another major conservative talk host who was also stunned as Rush and Hannity both turned from Cruz and went hardcore for Trump, when that belied 30 years of their stated philosophy of what they were looking for.
But, a lot of those conservative talk show hosts, and if we couch them in the big three or the big four, I won't out the one that you're talking about. I know who you're referring to. I won't out him without your permission. But if we refer to that small elite class, with the exception of Hannity and Rush, the rest of what I would call the deeper thinkers, they were really struggling with this Trump thing. And
they were
openly so. They weren't holding it back, and they were more fair. And like you said earlier, they were going to be anti-Hillary. They were going to be never Hillary. But man, they did not want on the Trump train.
No, they did, and I don't think that they were until he got until he got elected, Trump had no idea what the left was about. He had no idea what the left was about until after he was elected. Which the ironic thing, that's made him a much more conservative president, made him a better president. But you're right. There were a couple of the deeper thinking, which Rush had always been. I mean, I think Rush has always been like 10 times deeper than Hannity, always,
Well, we could do a show on that.
Yeah, we could do a show on that. But you're right. And it was interesting to watch it happen. And this is what's interesting about what I call the Trump cult, is some of them still look at some of these other conservative guys who've been supporting Trump solidly since the general election and his whole presidency, still look at them as never Trumpers, because it's like if you weren't on the Trump train from day one, you're not real or something. And I'm thinking, man, you need every vote, every voice. Don't worry about it. But yeah, there was some definite, incredible consternation among some of the bigwigs who were slower to get on the Trump train than others.
Do you think that if Rush had been what I would consider to be more ideologically honest at the time and had thrown his support behind Cruz, that would have been enough for Cruz to beat Hillary?
Way back is one of my columns for Breitbart. I don't think it was part of that series Bannon gave me, but it was a feature column. I said that the primary that would determine the Republican nominee would be the Rush, Drudge, Breitbart primary. That whatever candidate those three groups got behind, meaning those three audiences got behind, and those audiences obviously in a Venn diagram overlap a lot.
Yeah, right.
But I said, whoever wins the Rush, Drudge, well, actually, Breitbart. I think the Rush, Drudge, Breitbart talk radio primary would win the nomination. Mm-hmm. And Trump won Rush, he won Hannity, he won Breitbart, he won Drudge. Cruz won Levin, Cruz won Beck, and as it ended up, those Trump Cruz were in order 1, 2 of who in that primary. It wasn't very close.
Yeah. So ultimately, we got Trump.
Yep.
And regardless of the hashtag, he's not my president. He is our president.
Yep.
What do you admire most about the Trump presidency to date?
The way just his existence exposes the left for who they truly are. That is something that Cruz would not have done. Much as the left hates Cruz, the way they hate Trump has exposed them. So that's the main thing. The number two thing is the best thing Donald Trump ever did as president was early on cut all the red tape, reduce regulations through executive order. That's the most important thing he's done.
I would argue that that's number 2 behind his nomination of Gorsuch to the Supreme Court.
Okay, I could switch those two up. Yeah.
We're in agreement there for sure. I think Gorsuch is the most important nominee to any federal bench in my lifetime, and maybe the last century. I think he's going to have that much of an impact.
More than Clarence Thomas?
Clarence Thomas has been important on the conservative side, but Gorsuch is he is as solid a libertarian as he can be. In fact, as you know, he's already challenged the Trump administration's on several things. Their judicial department on several things. He has been much more libertarian than anybody I've ever seen on the court, except maybe some of the first Supreme Court justices appointed by the founding fathers. Apart from that,
the last great libertarians.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's exactly right. All right, so I gave you a shot at that side. What do you see as Trump's biggest weaknesses and failings?
Well, I think we're seeing it right now, actually. The reason that I was for Trump was because he was running against Hillary, which I think is a very valid reason.
Yeah.
I also knew that he brought some things to the table that were good. But my problems with Trump were always several things. Number one, he has absolutely no libertarian instincts whatsoever. Ronald Reagan understood the intersection of conservatism and libertarianism, where it intersected, and how important that was. Trump doesn't understand it. He's got no instincts of that whatsoever. And Trump is a believer in big government, long as he's running it. He believes big governments can do big things. Those were the instincts that worried me. And then I also knew he thought he could schmooze anybody. And I think that those three weaknesses are hurting him now. And I don't mean to blame him for much about what's going on, but it's about 3 weeks past time for him to have fired Fauci and Birx, or at least brought in some other experts to counter them, to mitigate their impact. Yeah. He is letting them run the country. And that is a big no-no. And I think he's so close to the situation, he can't step back and see it. So I think that in a way, the few problems I had with Trump are coming back to haunt us a little bit now.
What everybody, and we'll close this segment with this last part here. I mean, most people, when you say what bothers you about Trump, if he would just shut up on Twitter. I've actually almost had a turnaround on that. Yes, I probably do wish he would shut up, but at the same time, going back to your first point, every time he speaks, he not only exposes more about what the left really is and who they really are, but I am of the mind now that really and truly, Trump is just a street fighting New Yorker who will say anything at any time. He's set political correctness back at least a generation. Thank God for that. Yeah, and a lot of that comes from his tweets. But I've almost, I've come to the point where I don't care what he says. I'm just really going to watch what he does. And I know that it's important that a president leads by what they say. That's
what the bully pulpit. Yeah,
it is, and how they do it, and especially when they bring leadership or comfort to a nation in a crisis or that sort of thing, our confidence that we'll get through this. And maybe he's not as good at that as we would hope he would be. But I've gotten to the point where I also, one of my other hashtags was the popcorn presidency, and so I've enjoyed the entertainment value that we've had now for 4 years through this process. But do you think he's doing more damage, or with the tweet storms, or is that just something we just need?
I think on balance it's positive, but it's not. It's more like 60-40. Like he needs to get over Acosta. He is winning every battle with Acosta, but Acosta's got his mind off the big picture, so he's losing the war while he's winning every battle. He doesn't need to punch down at people like LeVar Ball, or as much as LeVar Ball needs to be punched at, not by the president,
Yeah.
But sometimes, man, he can just cut right through the clutter with it, and it's a powerful part of his bully pulpit is Twitter.
Yeah. Well, let's close this segment up. Take a break. Reload on our beverages. I don't know if you're having one or not, but if not,
no. But after that Rush segment, I may have to.
You may have to. You finally came clean. The world knows now. But again, joining me today is C. Edmund Wright, also right here in Raleigh, North Carolina, just a couple of miles from where we're sitting right now. But we're being good boys, and we're not violating the social distancing order. So we're doing this, a Zoom recording at the time. But we're going to come back in part 2 of this interview. We're going to talk specifically about the current crisis, pandemic, commie virus 2020, COVID-19, or the China virus, however you want to refer to it. So thanks, Edmund. We'll be right back with everybody in just a few minutes.
All right. Thank you.